Hello Power Platform friends. In this fun video I'm going to show you how to call an Azure DevOps pipeline from a pipeline in Power Platform. That's a lot of pipelines and a lot of power, so let's get started. What I'm going to show you in this video is how I take this solution right here called ALM Demo Solution, and I use the pipeline in Power Platform to deploy it to another environment. Then, when that pipeline in the Power Platform finishes its deployment, a flow will execute. That flow will then in turn call an Azure DevOps Pipeline to add the source code for this particular Power Apps solution to Azure DevOps. So let's see how it works. Here's the solution. As you can see, I have several components in it, including an environment variable, actually more than one, connection reference, a Canvas app, a cloud flow, actually two different cloud flows in here. So I will then go to the pipeline. And here's the pipeline I created. You can see I've run it before. This will take this current solution from the development environment and put it in the test environment. So I'm going to start that right now and show you the other pieces of the puzzle. The solution is now deploying. So how did I do this? Well, there's a nice thing that Microsoft does to help us ramp up and learn how to do this, and that really starts at this documentation right here called Extend Pipelines in Power Platform. So inside of this particular document, what I found was how this all works and how you can hook up a flow and a trigger and all these things and wire them all up. And the really nice part is this down here. Download sample solution. So what I did was I downloaded that sample solution and then I put it into my Power Platform environment. And so here I'm going to go back to the cloud flows in this solution that I downloaded. So here's the sample solution that you can download from that web page. And when you download it, inside of it, you can see all of these different flows that are hooked up, and may be hooked up, I should say, such that they fire when your pipeline in Power Platform runs and gets to some point within that pipeline. The event that I'm triggering on is on deployment completed. You can see they also give us on deployment requested, deployment started, pre-deployment completed, pre-deployment started. And so these are all kinds of different ways you can hook in throughout the run of that pipeline or even before it to do things. As I mentioned, my example goes through on deployment completed. So I took this flow that Microsoft created and gave to us, and what I did is edit it so that it will call the DevOps pipeline once this pipeline in the Power Platform has finished. So let's take a look at what this one looks like. I'm going to pop it in edit mode here. And I just heard the mail over here. The mail was sent because that pipeline finished, and actually my DevOps pipeline finished running, and it sent me an email that that happened. So you're about to see where that happens inside the flow. Again, keep in mind, there's many events you can trigger on in these pipelines for Power Platform via a flow. This again is the example of on deployment completed. If we look in the trigger body condition deeper into our settings here, we can see that this has been explicitly configured to run when my pipeline called Canvas pipeline executes. If we come back and look at the pipeline I showed you before, you can see here's that Canvas pipeline. So in other words, you can use this to tailor your particular flows to trigger only for certain pipelines. This information and the note up here was provided by Microsoft in the sample solution. It made it very easy for me to modify this to meet the needs of this sample. I did make slight modifications up here to the top of this, but they mostly had the same information in there. The next thing that I'm going to need to do is say which catalog. Well, the common Dataverse catalog, you pick the Power Platform's pipeline query, and then you pick on deployment completed action. That plus the things we put in the trigger condition will cause this to fire. Now when this fires and it executes, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set the name of my repository. It's called Canvas Dev. You may have noticed that back here in my repository name. So that's how you dial it into your repository when you call the DevOps pipeline, as you'll see here in a second. I'm not going to open this one up. This is another string variable, but what this is my DevOps PAT, or Personal Access Token. The instructions you can find to just go and do a search for how do I make a DevOps PAT. And then once you have that PAT, it's essentially a token that authenticates you to your repo. I'm going to put that in a variable because I'll need it to call the DevOps pipeline below. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check this code that comes out of the trigger. As you can see in the notes here, the deployment status indicates if it's successful, canceled, or failed, and we can react accordingly. So we're saying if the deployment succeeded, then what we want to do is add the solution to DevOps and create the settings files. Here you can see I'm using an HTTP action to make a post to Azure DevOps. Here's the call to the API. If I make that a little bit bigger here, you can see that we call into the repo. I could have actually tokenized that. I did below in another spot. Then where you're going, and this is the magic here, the 13. You see how it says pipelines and then 13? Well, if we come back and look at the pipeline I want to run, when you pop a pipeline, here it is, the one I want to run, look at this, pipeline ID equals 13. So that's your magic hook. That's how you figure out how to call this pipeline via the REST API. So back here is 13, and that basically kicks off that pipeline and runs it. Well, you have to pass it some parameters, and these come down in here. So what I'm passing as a parameter is the solution name. And notice this, it comes from the action outputs of the trigger body. So the trigger is actually pretty helpful. It has a lot of metadata about what this pipeline was run against. In this case, I want to know the solution name so I can go extract it from the Power Platform in my DevOps pipeline and then add it to DevOps. After you've got that, so this is essentially what kicks off the DevOps pipeline and runs it. And then when this is done, I'm going to send an email and I'm going to say, here's more of those action outputs. The pipeline name, Power Platform Pipeline, has completed the particular deployment stage. The artifact name, which is the name of the solution, has been deployed and is currently being added to source control. I put currently added to source control because many times this HTTP action will be called but not complete, and then this will go right on to send the email. So you could build in some checks to say, is this done, by calling the REST API in DevOps about the pipeline run, get its status, and then send the email. But in this example, it's a little simpler, and that's why I adjusted the verbiage accordingly. So what does this look like when it runs? Well, I heard those beeps, so I know it ran. And if we come back to our pipelines here, I should see that add solution to DevOps just ran. Yeah, so we're 9 minutes into the video and it ran 6 minutes ago, so that's great. So if we come in and look at add solution to DevOps, take a look at the latest run on it here and watch everything that happened. I have a lot of things that happen in here. The first thing I do is install the Power Platform tools. Then I do a quick who am I to make sure that I'm authenticated to the session. Then I export the solution as managed and unmanaged. After I do that, I unpack that solution to this local VM where this code is executing. Then I use the command line here to commit all the changes. I publish the solutions. And so now I have put those solutions into DevOps. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install the Power Platform CLI. Then I'm going to actually create settings files. These are the settings.json files that will hold all the dynamic values that go into things like environment variables and connection references. If you're using the Power Apps CLI or the Power Platform build tools for DevOps to do deployments, you'll probably know that these settings files are really important to ensure you can change those values as you take your solution from one environment to another. Then I'm going to publish those settings files in DevOps, and finally, then we're all done. So what does the output look like from this, right? So I ran it, you saw all these things going on in between. Here's what the output looks like. When I'm done, I can come back into the files in the repos here, and you can see this is the tab. I went over to it real quick to show you what it looked like before we did this work. Notice if we go into settings, the ALM demo solution is now in there, and if we go to solutions, it's blank. So here's what it looks like after we ran it. Look, new folder, ALM demo solution. See the difference? This is before, this is after. ALM demo solution is in here. This is the unpacked version, actually, of this Power App. Also, the solution has been zipped and put in here as a managed and unmanaged. So I have those as a record in my solutions folder. Then here's where I generated those settings files. As you can see, I made one for every environment that I'm going to need to deploy to. I have one for dev, QA, and prod. Now all I need to do is come and put in the values. This is the value of a SharePoint list URL. Actually, a GUID would be a better idea to put in here for portability. Here's a environment variable that holds a SharePoint site, and that value can then be put in here. And then here's a connection reference to a SharePoint online data source. As you can see, the connection ID for the particular connection I'll use to connect to that in this environment can be placed in here. So this is a really nice example of how we can automate and hook in DevOps to a Power Pipeline in order to make it better and do more things that the pipelines in Power Platform don't do right now. The other thing I'd like to show you is the email. I got it here. So here's the email that I sent to myself. You can see it says the Canvas pipeline has completed, and here's the solution name. So all of those placeholders I showed you that I got from the trigger came to good use there, and they made an intelligent email to communicate what was happening. I hope this was helpful for you. I'm going to show you one more bit about the pipeline itself. I bet you're wondering, oh man, how did Todd make that pipeline? Well, here is my pipeline, and add solution and DevOps is right here. As you can see, I used YAML to author my pipeline, and I am calling the Power Platform build tools for DevOps. Here's that task where I installed them, then the who am I, then my export. You can see I'm just setting all these different properties inside of here as I do task after task in order to accomplish all these things. And this one was fun. Here's how you can create the settings files. It might be possible to do that now with a build task. I didn't check, but at the time I built this, the only way to do it was through the CLI, so that's why I took that approach. Anyway, I hope this was very helpful for you and that you've got a good feel now for how these flows, again like this, if we come back to the last run history of that one that ran, here we can see that one I ran in the context of this video, and we can watch the run all the way through there and down through the end. So this is the best way, I think, to examine it and just essentially say when the pipeline's done, this trigger completes in the flow, and then it executes the DevOps pipeline by using a HTTP request. Hopefully this comes in handy for you, and this helps you enhance your pipelines and get more out of them. Thanks for watching the video.